Welcome everybody to our presentation this afternoon on Scrum, Kanban, and Scalable Agile. My name is John Friedman. I'm just going to do some introductions at the beginning. This afternoon, or morning or evening, depending on where you are, we'll have a brief introduction. Then Damon Poole will present Scrum and Kanban like chocolate and peanut butter. Andy Singleton will talk a little bit about some of the upcoming features in Assembla and approaches to Scalable Agile, and if everything goes well, we'll have a Q&A period at the end. Okay, I wanted to actually introduce our speakers very briefly up front, so we don't have to do that in the middle. Damon Poole is the president of Valtivity, a firm he founded recently. Prior to that, he was also founder and CTO and CEO at different times of Accurev, a leader in the SCM world, and he has introduced a number of award-winning products and has been very active in speaking about Agile and teaching Agile to a number of different communities, as well as being the author of an online ebook called Do It Yourself Agile Kickstart, which you can get at his website. Our other speaker, who will come after Damon, is Andy Singleton, who is the founder and president of Assembla. He's also basically leading the development team of Assembla, and he is managing a team that spans 16 countries on 4 continents, so he's well equipped to talk about Scalable Agile. He's also a blogger and a frequent speaker on software development topics. And in fact, I do want to recommend that everybody stick around and hear Andy's part of the presentation after Damon's. Next slide, please. Because Assembla really is a case study of using techniques that lead to Scalable Agile. And you'll hear more about this later, but basically the company used to be doing 3-week iterations, and they're now doing daily releases, and a lot of the things you're going to be hearing about from both Damon and Andy have actually been implemented at Assembla. So when Andy gets to talk, you'll hear really a case study of many of the principles that Damon will be talking about in the first part of the presentation. I just want to mention a couple of quick housekeeping things. We will be sending everyone in attendance an email within a few days with links to a replay of the broadcast as well as the slides. And I also want to mention for the Q&A period towards the end, you should have on your screen a box that says questions, and if you submit questions there, we will try to get to as many as possible during the Q&A period at the end of the session. So thank you for being patient. We're ready to go now, and Damon, take it away, please.
Okay, I just realized I was muted. All right, so I'm going to be talking about how you can take principles from Kanban and apply them to your current Scrum implementation. Okay. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so this is what I'm going to be covering today, and we're going to start out with why should we even bother. So I like to always start with software development nirvana. Right? What is software development nirvana? Generally, you know that if you've got a small team, they can deliver really quickly. Right? There's not a lot that's going to get in their way, and they're going to be continuing. They're going to be providing a continuous flow of working software. They're going to be having stories done on a regular basis to show that they are actually getting things done, right? So if this small team can't deliver stories quickly, if they can't get it done and have it where they can push the button and deploy it, there's something wrong. On a small team, that's sort of easy to detect, but one of the reasons it's easy to detect is not the size, but the speed at which they're going and the small story size that they're working on, right? So they get that constant heartbeat check of it's working, it's working, it's working, and as soon as something can't get to done, they know, okay, there's something broken and we have to look at that. So the question is, how can we take all of the principles that are being applied here, whether we realize it or not, and scale it out to a larger program? So there is actually something that most people are doing, whether they realize it or not, that is fast, is a small increment of value, and is actually the most value that your organization can be providing at that moment. And what that is hot fixes. If you think about it, you know, what's a hot fix? You've got to get it out there quickly, otherwise you're going to be losing value. Right, so you might think, well, that's negative value. But actually, providing that hot fix is negating the negative value, which is providing a high amount of value. And what gets in the way of a hot fix? Nothing. Right? So you get that done as fast as you possibly can. you do the coding, the testing, whatever needs to be done, you get that done in a short period of time, and you get it out to the customer. And so my question to you is, if that is the best way to provide the highest value quickly, why don't you do that for everything? And not without the running around with your hair on fire, of course. Okay, so let's take a quick look at Scrum just to set the context for our conversation about Kanban. Right, so, and here I've separated out product management, but in a single team, you'd have a product owner, you've got the backlog, you've got your customers, you've got the team, and a lot of people using Scrum have a Scrum board. But whether you have a Scrum board or something electronic like Assembla with its card wall, right, either way, that works fine. So, but if you're using Assembla, of course, you have the card wall right there for you to use included. So you get an increment of work, you pull that off, and customers give you more all the time, right? And at some point during your iteration, it's going to look like this. You've got things work in progress, some things that are tested but not yet considered done, that are coded, whatever, and eventually you get it all to done sometimes on the last day before the iteration, which of course is a problem right there. And then you can deliver that value to the customers, right? You don't have to, but you can. So there are some problems with Scrum. I'm going to talk about some, Andy's going to talk about some, but one of the problems here is that, right, you've got this continuous flow that you're doing, and then you stop, right? Everything comes to a screeching halt, you stop, and then you go again, right? So you stop, you go, you stop, you go. And it's the iterations that are setting that cadence. What you really want is a continuous flow, just like in software development Nirvana. Now, sometimes people say, well, wait a minute, my customers can't take the value that quickly. Well, they don't necessarily have to, right? If it's an installed application, they can take it whenever they want. They don't take it when you put it out there anyway. If you're in a SaaS situation, that's a little bit different. But if you've done that, that's because your customers are ready to take it that rapidly. Okay, so that's great for a single team, but what if we've got multiple teams? Right, so here I've got 4 teams, whether they're doing Scrum or Kanban or whatever, and this is a representation of just 4. I've worked with teams that have 10 Scrum teams on the same program working towards a single deliverable, 20, 40, even one program I've worked with has 80. Actually, that's 3 different programs I've worked with up around 80 teams on it now. So PowerPoint won't take all of that, so I've sort of simplified that down to 4 teams. So the basic idea is you have an overall program, and then you have a master backlog, backlogs per team, and like what we're going to see later from Andy is maybe you can still use a single overall backlog for all the teams. It just depends on what makes sense for you guys. But in this case, this particular organization uses backlogs per team, or they have search criteria which slices it down by the team. Okay, then you're going to integrate. So one of the issues with integration is, sometimes this is like, integration merge hell, that kind of stuff. It's really painful because it's all happening at the end of the iteration once a month, something like that. Some teams actually do integrate on a regular basis, on a daily basis, but sometimes people put it off till the end of the iteration. And that's actually a red flag, right? Because it's painful, it's difficult, and you can't really say that you have a shippable product if it's not fully integrated. So if you've got hardening and stabilization iterations, you've got QA iterations and dev iterations and integration iterations, and all these kind of things that aren't just plain old iterations, they need qualifying, that's really not shippable product, right? That's almost shippable, but not quite shippable. Shippable means that you could push the button on everything from all teams, and it could go out the door right now. Doesn't mean you have to, but you can. The other issue with not really shippable is that you don't have visibility into problems until the end of the iteration when you try to integrate it all together, right? So if you're integrating continuously, which we'll talk about a little bit later, then you have visibility into problems right away. And if you don't have visibility into problems right away, the resolution for those problems might not come up right away. Okay, so now let's take a bird's eye view of Kanban, and it is pronounced Kanban, not Kanban. So with Kanban, there's a couple of basic principles here, and I'm not going to completely get into Kanban, but the 3 main ones are visual system of managing work. So if you're using Assembla right off the bat with the card wall, you've got that visual system of managing work. And the benefits of that are you can see when things are getting gridlocked, that you've got too much stuff that's ready for testing, and you're still, nobody's actually getting it to done. So in that case, what that can signal is maybe we should stop developing news stories that the QA folks can't even finish QAing and help the QA folks. So it's a visual system of managing work. It uses limited work in progress. So whether you do this as a policy or the system that you're using actually enforces it, the idea is that you set limits, WIP limits, on each column here in your card wall. Excuse me. So for instance, in this case, I've said no more than 3 things on the to-do list, no more than 3 things at the, I've started coding, no more than 3 things that are sort of coded and ready for test, and no more than 3 things that I believe are tested and ready to go, but we haven't done the sort of final check, whatever that is, performance or UAT or whatever it is. So now those limits don't have to be hard limits. They can be like rumble strips that say, the limit is there for a good reason. If you have to go over it, know that you're doing it. Know that you're violating that policy, and try to get back under the limit as soon as you possibly can. And if you find that you're violating that WIP limit on a regular basis, go into why. Why is that happening? Oh, well, we have 10 developers and half a QA person. All right. So the way this work is done is that it's pulled through the system. So you can't start on something in a column if there isn't a slot for it to be done. So if I'm going to do final testing for UAT sign-off or whatever, not until there's a spot for that can I pull something in. And that works all the way down. So the idea is that you're going to have constant flow through the system, and as you find problems, you're going to know about them and fix them right away. Now, there's another principle that I don't go into here, but Kanban says you should have explicit policies, and that all of your policies should be explicit and well-known. Okay, so OnePiece Flow. Now, not a lot of people have actually heard about OnePiece Flow, as it turns out. More people have heard about small batch size. This comes from Lean. Kanban actually comes from Lean, and Scrum, at the end of the day, really comes from Lean as well. But the underlying principle that makes both Scrum and Kanban successful is something called OnePiece Flow. So many Scrum teams actually gravitate towards OnePiece Flow, whether or not they know that that's what it's called, or small batch size. At the end of the day, an iteration is a small batch size. If you have a velocity of 40 story points, then your batch size is 40 story points. You're not taking on 80 story points of work, you're taking on 40. And that's better, but OnePiece Flow says that you should be working on at most one thing at a time. Now, there is a little bit of a difference here with software, because if you have multiple developers that can be working on something, you can be working on multiple pieces, but each piece should be flowing through as though it was one piece. And what that means is, imagine that you could, as a team, do 3 hotfixes simultaneously without impeding the speed of any one of them. And if you did 4, one of them would slow down. Okay, then your maximum is 3. But you should be working on any one thing as though it's a hotfix. That's the basic idea. So if you look at any particular user story, it has all kinds of content, specification, design, code, integration, then some optional things I've heard about at the end. Because not everybody does those things. But in any case, every story has a certain amount of stuff that needs to be done for that story. And I've color-coded that. If you look at an overall project, you've got small stories, big stories. They all still have those components in there that need to be done. And if you look at any one story, right, so here within an iteration, let's say this is a month, if I'm looking at a particular story and when those activities might be done, right, so specification might be during the planning meeting. I say, this is the user story. As a product owner, the developer says, well, is it really that? And at the end of the day, at the end of the planning meeting, you say, okay, we've got that user story figured out. We know what we're talking about. When the person actually picks it up and starts working on it, which may be weeks later, days later, whatever, and starts to do design. Now, by design, I don't mean, heavy upfront architectural diagrams and all that. It may be that you put together a UML diagram, or that you have a small bit of design, or as you're coding, you're thinking, should I code it this way? Should I use this method that already exists? Right? You have to think through, how am I going to do this? And then once you've made that decision, you actually code it. And you may have a loop there where you're thinking, coding, whatever it is. You still need to do design. You still need to do coding. And then at some point, integrate it in. And maybe much later, somebody eventually gets around to doing the testing and then the documentation. So that's one story I'm looking at. What if I look at all of the stories within an iteration? If if I'm seeing something like this where I do all the specification up front and then the design sort of at the same time because people are taking on all kinds of stories to start and they're not actually getting them to done first, if you squint at this, what does this look like? It looks like Waterfall. And in fact, this is called mini Waterfall, which is an anti-pattern. This is something that a lot of Scrum teams fall into because the focus is on getting it all done at the end. And come, heck or high water, people get it done at the end of the iteration, and sometimes they cut corners just so they can say that they're done, right? And so here we've got testing all scrunched up at the end, and, how does that work? Not very well. So the idea with OnePiece Flow, right, is that for any particular story, when you start on it, you're going to go as fast to done as you possibly can. Now, that doesn't mean rushing. I don't mean rushing. What I mean is you're going to take the delays out, right? You're going to take the route where there are no stoplights. You're not going to break the speed limit here. You're not going to push anybody, take shortcuts, but you're not going to delay it by saying, well, we don't have a QA person available right now, or they're working on something else. No. You're going to treat it like a hot fix, get it done as quickly as you possibly can without delay. It's about taking out the delays and not taking on too much work at any time. So I'm going to do everything like that, and at the end of the day, it's going to look more like this. So all the way through the iteration, I have the various activities going on. This is what high-performing, efficient, value-oriented Scrum teams gravitate towards, right? Because otherwise, you end up back here, right? This, in many ways, is actually worse than Waterfall. Okay. The only saving grace in that case, actually, is that you may inefficiently develop stuff that people want and will be willing to provide, to pay more for earlier. So very inefficiently produced value. So, that still works. But at the end of the day, this is what you want to see, OnePiece Flow. Okay, so how can we start applying Kanban to Scrum? We have an existing Scrum implementation. What are we going to do? Well, first off, we can implement a task board. Now, in Assembla, that's very easy. You have the card wall. You might not have heard about the card wall, but take a look. It's pretty cool. And actually, you'll see a picture of this later, I believe. So, the exact names of your columns, of course, are going to depend on, how you've got it set up. It doesn't really matter. But just implementing the card wall, starting to use that, is one step towards Kanban. And if you're already doing it, great. You're already using one of the Kanban principles. Now, is it Kanban, Scrum? At the end of the day, does it really matter? No. You can put in work in progress limits. You can say, you know what? We don't want to have more than this many stories at this particular stage of development, and continue to do everything else that you're doing in Scrum. There's no reason that you have to change everything. You can just start introducing things and saying, we do have a lot of stories that are, almost done, that only move to done at the very end of the iteration. Maybe we should put work in progress limits in there and keep a handle on that. Okay, so in Scrum, over time, it is going to look, like this. Now, one of the things is if you want to get stories to done on a regular basis, you have the issue that you need to be able to build and test it, right? So what can you build and test in general? You can build and test whatever's in the latest. Now, if you're doing something like this, right, what's in the main line? Everything, whether it's really done or it's got tests or it's been tested or not. So one of the things you can do is you can break it up by environment, and you can say, all right, I'm going to have a continuous integration environment for each of these various stages. You can set up branches or streams or whatever makes sense in your environment. Now, branching, streams, all that sounds like a lot of work, but then that's entirely automatable so that as a developer, you check it in, the process takes it automatically through the rest of the way. What that means is if you have a build, and stories flow through. If you have a build that's against work in progress, right, stuff that's been checked in but it's not necessarily ready for prime time, you can have that build, and that's great. But you can also have one that has all the stories in it that people believe are, the coding is done. Maybe the tests aren't written yet. Maybe they are. Maybe they've been run. Who knows? But I believe for these stories that all the coding has been done. And then the next step is you can say, you know what, give me just the tested stories. Now, where this comes in to be really useful is if you're a product owner, a documentation person, or a QA person, right? If you're, that's all sort of the same thing. So let's take, for instance, the product owner. You want to show somebody something, and you take it out of mainline. It's got stuff that's been checked in but not tested. You go to show it to the stakeholder, and it falls over because you go to log in, and it fails, right? Because somebody was working on the login story. In this case, the login story would not be in that build of the product. So you as a product owner could go and show it to somebody, get feedback. You as a QA person can be doing exploratory testing and not have to worry that what you're going to be running into is bugs that would have been found by the tests that are going to exist but don't exist yet or haven't been run. Same thing for a documentation person that needs to take screenshots. You're only going to be taking screenshots of stuff that has been tested and works. All right, so awesome, wonderful. I want to start doing all this stuff. How would I possibly do it? Because, you know, if I just got rid of iterations, when do I do my retrospectives? You know, when do I do the iteration review? I don't get it. So let's take a look at that. Now, there's a principle that in the tech world we all know about, which is called the decoupling principle, right? You want things as little tightly coupled as you possibly can. If you look at something and you're like, oh, that could be loosely coupled, you pull it apart. So in this case, we're going to apply the decoupling principle to iterations. What is coupled to an iteration? Well, there's a bunch of things here, and I'm only going to go over a few of them. I'm not going to go over all of them. For instance, I'm not going to cover commitment, which is coupled to the iterations. You can find that on my blog. I've got something about how you decouple those two things. But getting to done, retrospectives, iteration reviews, backlog grooming, story estimation, and choosing stories, those are all coupled to the iteration. So how do we decouple it? Well, if we're doing OnePiece Flow, we're most of the way there, right? We've got done completely decoupled from the end of the iteration. We don't have to wait to the end of the iteration to have stories done. We get them done all the way through, right? So check on the check. When you have a whole bunch of stories done, then you can say, all right, you know what? I'm going to do my iteration review right now. And the next time I do the iteration review, it doesn't matter when it is. I'm going to review whatever I've done since the last iteration review. And that might be really good. So now, if in your case you've set up this cadence of iteration reviews every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or whatever it is, you can keep doing that. That's fine. But realize you're doing it for a particular reason, because people are only available every 3 weeks and they like it every 3 weeks, but it doesn't have to be coupled to the iteration at all. So if you go from 3 weeks to 2 weeks and they still want to review every 3 weeks, fine, you could do that. Save aside a build from that time and review that. Same thing for the retrospective. You could do the retrospective after you do the iteration review, or really you could do it anytime, right? If you've got some problem that's boiling up and is an issue, do you have to wait 3 weeks to bring it up? No, bring it up right now. Now, it may be, and that's a principle from Lean called stop the line, it may be that you stop the line whenever there's a problem and you talk about it, and still have the retrospective on a regular basis to surface deeper issues. So for instance, if you start out at 4-week iterations and then you move down to 2, who has the most frequent frequent retrospectives? The folks doing 2 weeks. But who probably needs it the most, especially when they're beginning? The folks that are doing 4-week iterations, right? Because they're new to it. Why have it coupled to the iteration length? You don't have to. There's no reason that you do. All right. Estimation. When should you do estimation? Well, if you've got somebody that's breathing down your neck and saying, I want to know exactly when this is going to come out, okay, you're not going to be able to apply this. But to the extent that you can, there's no reason that you have to do the estimation at the sprint planning. You could do it. Many groups basically do backlog grooming and estimate unestimated stories every week. They just go to the top of the backlog. If there's not an estimate there, they estimate it. Great. So when we come to sprint planning, it's a lot easier because then you only have to estimate the stories that are not yet estimated. And to go even further with that, at the end of the day, if you have gotten into the habit of creating very small user stories that have value, you can leave that estimation until the very end. I'm going to do another story. I pull it off the backlog. I estimate it right then. Bring the people together that need to estimate it. Because at the end of the day, you never know which story is going to come next. If you're doing something like Kanban, right, you don't have to commit to a month of work. You can just say, we're going to do whatever's next in the backlog as appropriate. As far as who's going to do the story, the same thing. Joe pops his head up and says, hey, guys, I'm done with this story. I'm thinking about doing this one. What do you think? Hey, Joe, you don't actually know Java. Oh, right, okay, but I want to learn it. Oh, well, that's probably not the story that's best to start with, but if you look at the next one down, that's a good one, and I'll help you with that. Okay, great, that's mine, and on you go. And if that doesn't work out, you know right away. You don't have to wait. So, It's low risk, and recovering is very easy. Burnups, right? So burnup is definitely, what did we do? What have we done since the iteration started, and are we going to be done at the end of the iteration? At the end of the day, if you have a 4-week iteration, it's really a trailing 4-week burnup. You can do a trailing 4-week burnup at any time, right? So you could do it today and go look back 4 weeks. That's fine. So that doesn't have to be tied to the iterations either, right? So it can look like this, right? So same thing with velocity. And you might say, well, the graph is going to come out different. That's fine, but it's going to be bumpy anyway. It's just the bumps are in different places. The question is my velocity going up, down, staying the same? It doesn't really matter when you calculate it. All right, so what is this going to look like in practice? It's going to look like this, right? Just continuously going through these activities, and then I don't need the iterations anymore. Now, I'm not saying get rid of the iterations. You can apply just some of these things, and life will be better. For instance, many groups do backlog grooming once a week instead of once an iteration. So, mixing Kanban into Scrum. If you look at pure Scrum, that's what we got over on the left. And for example, an example mix would be here. Most of the stuff I'm still doing just like in Scrum. I got a self-organizing team, I got a product owner, I'm doing the daily stand-up. All that great stuff that you love from Scrum, keep doing it. But instead of doing sprint planning, now we're going to do weekly story estimation. Instead of doing a sprint review, we're going to do monthly reviews or on demand, weekly retrospectives, right? Trailing 4-week burnup. Maybe you're at the point where you're ready to get rid of sprints, and then stuff you're going to add in, the Kanban board, or in the case of Assembla, the story wall, task wall, card wall. I'm going to do OnePiece Flow. I'm going to put into place work in progress limits. It's up to you. Not saying switch, saying let's add some stuff in. Okay, so now what about synchronizing teams? Scrum is notoriously bad at synchronizing teams. It says, oh, use Scrum with Scrums. Well, that's not too bad. But let's take a look at another approach that we can use. So first of all, let's talk about multi-stage continuous integration. All right, so if you've got all these teams integrating together, that can be painful, especially if you're doing OnePiece Flow and you're getting that story in there all the time. And bang, there's a problem. You affect all the teams. Now, if you've got 80 teams, this is really painful. What you can do is you can interpose another stage that says, all right, some of these teams are more closely coupled than others, so we'll interpose another stage here. This could be done with a branch, a stream. There's a lot of techniques. If you're using Maven, you can do, you can use palms and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, basically, you've got multiple stages where you're integrating multiple teams together before integrating at the whole team level. All right, so it's going to look like this. So I do CI on the stuff on my team on this story. It works. Excuse me. I'm going to move it on to the next level, integrate with the other team that I'm closely coupled to, and only if it works at that point, I'm going to move it on. So it's a lot like when you check in. Do you check in after you make every change? No, right? You're going to do some level of checking before you check it in, and it affects anybody else. Same thing here, except we're applying that practice that's normally applied at the individual level to the team level. All right. So, what makes this all tick? At the end of the day, it's individuals and interactions, right out of the manifesto. You've got to have good Agile project management. Now, in this case, you guys are using Assembla, check. Your SCM has to fit that model, right? So if you're using CVS, well, that's maybe not the best way to go. You want to look into something like Subversion, Git, Accurev, whatever makes sense for you. Continuous integration, right? There's a lot of things out there that you could look into. You got to have a good continuous integration system in there. If you've just got a bunch of scripts, that's not going to work out too well for this high, fast-paced development that we're talking about here. At the end of the day, you put all this together that we've been talking about, and you're going to have the ability to do continuous delivery. And you've got this constant heartbeat of, have I gotten to the point of getting the story from the customer to the product management or whatever you're using to triage stories. You've got it in there. The team's working on it. They're getting it done quickly. They've integrated at the team level, the multi-team level, the whole product level. It's ready to go or not. If you can't get a story through this cycle really quickly, you got a problem. And you're going to know right away that you got a problem. When you get that problem out of the way, right, things are going to go smoothly. So this is exception-based improvement. As soon as there's a problem and you can't get it through the cycle, figure out what that problem is, correct it, and life's going to be good. So in general, it's going to be flowing smoothly. but it doesn't always work. So now in this case, if you've got a team that's got a story that is a problem, it's only hanging up that team. It doesn't have to hang up all the other teams. And in this case, these teams might be doing Scrum, they might be doing Kanban, whatever it is. The fact is that you've got multiple teams all interacting together here for continuous delivery. All right, so that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. I'm with Velocity. You can learn more at velocity.com. I've got a bunch of resources out there. You can keep track of upcoming webinars. I've got a freely downloadable ebook out there called Do-It-Yourself Agile Kickstart. It's step-by-step how to get started with Scrum if you're not doing anything at all. Kanban is another way to go. Myself, all of my experiences with helping folks that are doing Scrum today to move to Kanban. I'll have a new ebook coming out on that soon. Other things Velocity offers is something called Agile Whole Team Training. It's different than, say, CSM training because the cost is lower, and it's not just for the Scrum Masters. Anybody basically can come to one of these trainings. There's no prerequisite at all, no technical knowledge required. It's completely hands-on, great team building activity, and you'll learn pretty much everything you need to get up and going with Scrum. The other thing you can do is, actually, I'm sorry. So the hands-on Agile Immersion has been canceled, so that's too bad. But the on-site is still available, and that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. Andy, over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, as you can see, I'm getting through this big deck. Just a second. I found Damon's description of the simple Kanban process and how that it can be extended to these multiple builds to be very exciting, mostly because this is me, Andy Singleton. I am a Scrum non-believer. Damon talked about the problem that you run into integrating the product of Scrum iterations. We actually run into the problem earlier with some basic team management issues. First of all, Scrum teams are limited to about 10 people. After that, you're into Scrum of Scrums, which is really hierarchy. You're getting out of Agile and into the realm where things are centrally managed, and the central managers are often clueless. So you lose a lot of advantages there. Second problem, and this is really a big one for us, is that Scrum is not designed for distributed teams. It's explicitly recommended for co-located teams. And distributed teams are the base case for assembly users, and in fact for any big project. And the third problem is that iteration planning is hard. Scrum guys want you to sit down and plan out what you're going to do in your iteration. They've softened that from commitment to forecast, but still it's hard, and it's very hard for multi-team efforts. I'm well known for saying that I don't think estimating and forecasting is worth the effort, and that we could save a lot of time if we skipped it. I'm all about getting more done with less work. Here's a picture of a process that I call Scalable Agile, which is not Scrum, and which is now guiding the work of our own development teams and the design of our tools. It's essentially the same process that Damon just described to you with a few variations. Damon talked about 4 important components: project management, which you see over here on the left, I've sort of in a schematic form; individual interactions, which you see here with the contributors column; continuous integration, which you see here with these on-demand test environment icons; and finally, source code management. I guess source code management was in the middle for Damon, which I put in here as release, merge, and assembly. If you look in the contributor column, you'll see that we've included a variety of different kinds of contributors. So the major difference between what Damon was talking about and our sort of large-scale vision for Scalable Agile is that in Damon's case, he's starting with the assumption that all of the teams are organized on the same basic Scrum team model. But I think we can really relax this assumption. We can bring in all sorts of contributors, individuals, the Scrum teams, whole companies. For instance, Google in their Android project gets contributions from Qualcomm, which has 3,000 engineers in their contribution system. So I think this is going to be huge. I think it's going to be huge, but my marketing guys have asked me to skip over it. So we'll go to we'll come back to it when it's huge. We'll go to a simpler view. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the features that we're putting into Assembla at a low level to support this process. The key thing that you have to do in any Agile process is you have to create a prioritized backlog. This is what gets you delivering the best stuff first. And we've built a feature that we call the Simple Planner that helps you make a sorted backlog list and select the topmost items to work on in either a Scrum or a Kanban process. Here's a picture that I took off of our test system. It's an unreleased feature. You start by entering tickets into the new column. You sort them into the prioritized backlog, and then you pull off the stuff that you want to work on into your current work bin, which is here represented as a column. I'm going to look at each of these columns separately. Doesn't this look like it would be a great mobile app? So that's definitely one of the things we're going to do. In the new column, you can quickly enter a ticket. We've simplified it down, so it's just a title and a description. The idea is that it should be easy to collect information from a range of stakeholders. Those people cannot estimate or sort your tickets, so they pile up in this new column where a product owner or tech lead can find them and sort them into the correct priority position in the backlog. Backlog is the heart of your planning process. You want to make sure this is sorted in priority order so you can always go and pull stuff off the top. You can sort it in our UI with a drag and drop. It's a very fast AJAX UI, similar to the card wall. Or you can use these little icons. If you want to work on something, just hit the send to top rollover icon. And if you don't want to work on it, you can hit the send to bottom rollover icon. If you're like us and you have a big backlog, we have 500 tickets, you're going to need a UI where you can see more tickets and in fact subset them so that you can prioritize them by feature team. And that's one of the features that we're adding to this UI. Once you are ready to work, you move tickets over into the current work bin. You can see at this stage, it shows the user working on it. There's a little user picture and the status, essentially the column on the card wall or Kanban board view. In either a Scrum or a Kanban process, you're only going to want to work on a small number of tasks at a time. At the top of each of these columns, we show you a ticket count and also a sum of the estimate points that are in the ticket. You can change these estimate points using the little small, medium, large icon right on the ticket or just enter numbers. In this case, we've assigned a capacity to our bin of 28 points. You can also you can load up the bin by hitting this load button. And what it'll do is it'll go over the backlog and it'll find 28 points worth of tickets and it'll stick them into your current work bin. If you're running a Scrum iteration, then you hit the load button once in every iteration, and you finish all your tickets, essentially burn them down. They move into this closed area at the bottom, and when you're done, you can hit the close iteration button, and it'll throw that milestone or iteration into a historical reporting area, and it'll start a new, clean, current iteration. So that's how you would do Scrum. If you're running Kanban, it's almost exactly the same, except you load frequently. So that's all you have to do, load frequently. And in this kind of planning view, that's the only difference between an iterative Scrum process and a Kanban process. In either case, the stuff that you have in the current bin will show on the Assembla card wall, where you can hopefully move it through a process. Once you're done development, you're going to have to take your code and merge it together. And this is a very critical technology for any of these Kanban continuous processes because it allows you to get away with not planning releases at fixed times. Instead, you use Damon's idea that work is always pulled through the system. You pull finished features when they're ready into your current release. And essentially, this allows you to plan at the end and skip all that stuff about planning at the beginning. Damon built a whole company, AccuRev, to deliver this code merge capability. That's how important it is. And in the AccuRev system, you can select code by status. So you can get a build that represents the work that's at each stage of your Kanban process. We use an open source system called Git to manage our workflow. And it essentially allows each contributor to do manual review and builds. I'm going to show you a new workflow that we built to make it easy to review and pull code into the various builds and into the final release. We call it the Advanced Merge Request. Here's a picture of it. It's available now on our production system because we just pulled it through yesterday. A contributor writes code in a branch or clone of the repository and then submits a merge request like this for review. I'll describe it in pieces to make it easier to see on video. The person submitting the request writes a title and a description and can link it to the ticket. In this case, ticket 12,323. As a reviewer, when you receive this merge request, you have a control bar. There's specific things that we want you to do. We want you to get changes and test them. Then we want you to vote by banging on one of these buttons, or merge, or discuss, or ignore. We give you instructions, so you can always expand panels and see what are the Git commands that are related to each of these things that you need to do to move through the workflow process. And in fact, we have two sets of instructions because there's two roles. A reviewer, who's reviewing and accepting code, and a contributor who's proposing code to the reviewer. Depending on your permissions and whether you have the right to contribute or merge in each of the source and target repositories, you'll get one or the other of these control bars, or both in this case. Under that, there's some information about, more information about the merge request. The most important thing that I wanted to talk about is the two different kinds of sources. You're always sending from a branch to another branch. In the Git system, you can use two different kinds of sources. You can use sources that are temporary branches in the same repository. This helps you work in a synchronized full team. We got this workflow from Garrett, the system that Google uses to manage Android development, and that's actually scalable to contributions from hundreds of sources, and we use it ourselves. You can also, in Git, accept contributions from forks or clones, essentially completely different project workspaces. This allows the contributing teams or individuals to work more independently and possibly to scale through more of those cascading builds that you saw Daymond illustrating. The fork workflow is popular on GitHub, where it's proven to be scalable from small to very large projects. So what happens when you get a merge request from a strange contributor? Well, you can start a discussion. You can review all the code using the change sets view or the files affected view, and we've built a really nice AJAX UI so that you can pop up the code and the diffs and see them, comment on them, and get this process moving. We actually are using these tools at Assembla as we've been testing them and pretty much implementing this process as you see it, although we don't have a very large variation in the contributors. We basically have individuals and what I call feature teams. But we're pulling work into our current milestone. We're running it through a Kanban process. Each feature team has on-demand test environments that they can go to Amazon and get. So this is a really important cloud technology, I think, for this kind of scalable agile process. I think it goes with these cloud build environments. When they're sure that it works with the released code, when they show the merge works with the release code, they can propose a merge and it goes straight into the release. We've been getting good results from this. We have moved from 3-week iterations, which were actually getting slower and slower, to daily releases, and I'm noticing a bunch of advantages. Each feature fix is delivered faster, and if you think about it, that's sort of a mathematical certainty because nothing is going to wait until the next release time. We're doing smaller releases, which put a lot less stress on the team, fewer bugs get fixed faster, and we're supporting about 25 people, so we're more than a single Scrum team, but less than the kind of 10 or 80 Scrum teams that Damon has worked with, distributed across 10 countries, so it's definitely works with a distributed team. It was pretty easy to switch. It took about 1.5 months for us to get rolled over. But most of that time was spent making these on-demand test environments, which I thought was very important because that allows the developers to take full responsibility. They've seen it work. They can get test environments on demand. They don't have to wait for QA. They don't have to wait for someone to give them a slot in the build, and it removes a lot of the constraints of central planning, accelerates a lot of things. So I think it was worth the effort, and I would recommend all of these things. And definitely do it again the same way. With that, I will open the floor up for questions. I don't actually know how to work this question thing. Damon, are you there?
Okay.
I'm here.
Well, Andy, this is Okay. And this is John Friedman. I'll just sort of field the questions and hand them off to Andy and Damon. First of all, thank you very much, Andy and Damon. That's a lot to think about. And a lot of new things coming up. Just quickly, just to repeat for people who might have missed it, we will have a copy of this broadcast available in a few days, and also the slides. So we'll send everybody an email with links to those, so you'll have those in a few days. And we have time now for some questions and answers. So please, if you notice on your screen, there should be a space for questions. So please go ahead and send them in, and we'll see how many we can answer in the next few minutes.
Here's one. When will the backlog planner be available in production? In about 4 weeks. And one of the good things about that feature is that we're going to release it as one of our freemium features. We have certain features that are free. We call them simple single free tools: Subversion, Git, and Stand Up. And we're going to put Planner without the rest of the tickets tool into that freemium distribution. It'll also be integrated as a non-default tab in your tickets tool, and you'll be able to select it as a default if you decide that you like it.
Let's see. Damon, we have one for you. Why are daily releases relevant to me? My customers want software once per year. Do I still need to think about daily releases?
Okay. Well, if there's no value to you in daily releases, there's no particular reason that you have to do it. The other thing that you can do is you can have releasable things on a daily basis. So if you cannot get to the point of releasable on some regular basis, then I would say that's going to put that yearly release more in jeopardy, right? And also the thing that you're going to get out of being able to be releasable on a regular basis, whether it's daily or not, is you're going to learn a lot of stuff, right? If you don't learn until the end of the yearly release that some technology choice that you've made was a mistake, now you've got a year of stuff that you've had on top of that technology choice. You know, maybe you went with Dojo instead of GWT, and you wish now you're done with GWT, or vice versa. And you got a whole bunch of stuff you built around it. Well, you know, you may have to start from scratch. So if you're constantly producing software that works and validating your design, your business decisions, and all that kind of stuff, you're going to get a lot of value out of it, whether you release daily or weekly or not.
I would add that it's definitely true that a lot of people can only release, for instance, annually, because that's as frequently as their customers are willing to absorb new software. But in that case, you're running these, as Damon said, you're running these frequent releases and even daily releases for your own guys. So think about the situation that a person is in if he's building a big new feature. He wants to make sure that on the day that that's ready for integration testing, he can go into integration testing. And that's the privilege that you're giving that person.
Great. Well, here's a question addressed to Andy, although Damon may have something to say also. What kind of predictability do you have around when a feature will be released?
I'll go back to Damon with that and say that I think that you get predictability by using the OnePiece Flow idea and the constraints of Kanban, which are really designed. Damon didn't bring this up. He brought up the idea of Kanban as a pull process. But why? It's designed to get a feature from start to finish in the fastest possible time. That's why you're limiting all the other work in progress. So in actuality, any of the estimates that you make are going to be better because you're not going to be derailed along the way.
Right, and the way I like to look at any of those questions, that basically there may be an underlying assumption that you already have predictability, and I would definitely, question that right from the get-go. But one way you can look at it is always start from wherever you are and say, do I have predictability now? If not, well, then it doesn't really matter. If you believe you do, and it's something you don't want to lose, then neither Scrum nor Kanban ask you to give up predictability. You can still do, instead of doing a sprint planning, you could do planning for the whole year if you want to. Right? There's no reason you can't. And then you can revisit that planning every iteration. So if there's a value in your organization for producing a full year plan, go for it. One of the things that can often come up in the grassroots efforts of going Agile is, we don't need to do that anymore, and we're not going to. Well, I would caution you against that because upper-level management might say, you're right, you're not going to, and you're going to be working on something else, and it might not be at this company, right? So you got to be careful of that kind of thing. And then over time, when you realize that you're getting other values, people may start to have less interest in predictability. You know, at the end of the day, why do people want predictability? Because I promised that they would have this thing in a year, and I want to make sure that a year from now I can give it to them. But if you are able to have something flow through the system in weeks, and they could use it, you know, a week from now, and you can do it, and it's that important, then do it, right? So then it's predictability of getting something through the system rather than predictability of hitting a particular date, which personally, I don't have a lot of confidence in folks predicting something a year out.
But the confidence that we're trying to give people is the confidence that they control the roadmap, the priority order. And that's the annual plan that really works with this kind of planning and is in fact essential for sorting that backlog, that they've really been able to express clearly what the priority order is. Once you've done that, the quality of your estimating can be better or worse, but it's probably going to be good enough. So for instance, in the backlog sorter that we've built, I didn't show this to you, but it'll put little bars in, and it'll tell you when, based on your historical velocity, its estimated date, when it thinks you're going to be done with that many points.
Right, and if there's a bunch of stuff in that year plan that is not time sensitive, and then somebody says, where is that thing? If you've gotten to the point where you can release things on a regular basis, whether with Scrum or with Kanban or both, then you can say, you know what, let's just get that out of the way. Let's get that done first, because all these other things are not time sensitive. And then you're going to be delighting the customer. Or even if you can't release it right away, get it done first so that it's in a releasable state, so that you know when that year comes, no matter what else is not done, that's done, and they can have it.
Terrific. Here's a product question for Andy. Somebody would like to know when the features you demonstrated will be made available to private install users. So Andy, maybe briefly describe what private install is, because it's fairly new, and then answer the question.
Private install is the installed version of Assembla. It's a virtual machine that contains all of the bazillion processes that make Assembla work as a real-time system, and it takes about 3 weeks from the time that we release something on the Assembla.com before it will flow through into the private install release. But during the next quarter, we're going to be doing those releases every 3 weeks.
Great. So private install is basically if you have a need like security to have Assembla behind your firewall, there's now an option for that. So here's a question for both. Any thoughts around how to get buy-in for very frequent releases from non-development team members, for example, the training or communications teams in a corporation? So how do we get buy-in from the non-development people that are affected by our processes?
Well, I think marketing is probably the easiest, and John, I think you're probably a good example of somebody in that group. And so, not to speak for you, but, well, I guess to speak for you, in my experience, marketing, it takes a little while to get from big bang announcements down to smaller announcements, but you know what? With Twitter out there these days, it's great to have a steady stream of things that marketing can put into that Twitter stream. Life moves pretty fast these days. On the other side, when it comes to training, one of the things you might want to look at there is, can training be simplified, right? So is there something that you can do to simplify training? If you've got big bang training, you may actually be pointing out a problem and not something that you want to figure out how to do differently.
The same thing is definitely true of documentation, which is hell to maintain these days. But that's why people are going to Q&A sites. So there's a lot of tactics you can use there. But Damon, maybe one of the things that people could use is the principle of pull. That if people are having a hard time absorbing the new releases, that they should have a way to pull things to their stage.
Yeah, and as I was saying before, this also can be applied here, is that you don't necessarily have to go to frequent releases. If the first step that you have is that you release a bowl frequently, and nobody sees the training only being updated yearly as a problem, and that's the only thing that's keeping you from releasing yearly, well, then it's not a problem. Just because development wants to release it frequently doesn't mean the rest of the organization wants to, and And it should be that the whole organization is behind it. So if there's no business reason for doing it, then fine. If there is a business reason for doing it and training is the long pole, then now you've exposed that you've got a business problem, and how do you solve it? So simplifying training, adding features to the product to make the training simpler, creating modules so that you only have to update certain modules and not the whole thing. There's a lot of stuff you can do there. Agile doesn't necessarily give you the solution to everything. It will just more quickly point out that you have a long pole in the tent.
Terrific. I think we're going to have time for only one or two more questions right now, but we will get back to people who've sent in questions. We'll reply to each of them by email within the next few days, so if you don't get them answered now, you will get a response soon. So let's try one or two more here. Well, here's one for you, Andy. Are there any plans to release an aggregated planner for Assembla portfolio?
Yes. What we're doing now with Simple Planner is hopefully giving people an easy way to plan their work inside a single team workspace. But as Damon illustrated, a lot of people have multiple teams working on one big project, which requires a different kind of dashboard that will allow you to allocate workout stories and epics, for instance, which I didn't show, and which are sort of, I see there's another question here about what's it going to take for Assembla to support the formal Scrum process, and the answer is really that we need to add the story subtask views to these planners. But we're hard at work trying to design a dashboard that will allow you to see a multi-team view and allocate out work appropriately. And in fact, if you would like to participate in that design effort, please send me an email, andy@assembla.com, because we're looking for ideas.
Thank you. I think we'll do one more question. I would say, though, if anybody has any reactions to things you've heard today, suggestions, if you'd like information about what Assembla is doing in this scenario, or you want information on some of the classes and services that Daymond offers, obviously please go to Valtivity.com or Assembla.com and send us emails, and we will respond. So, last question. I guess maybe we start with Damon on this one. It's sort of a long one, but I'll summarize. Has Agile or Kanban helped you deal with developers incorrectly trying to fulfill their role, rather than trying to help the product, i.e., a manager who wants to spend all his time doing code management when actually very little of that is really necessary? So I guess this question is, does Kanban or any of the things we've been talking about help focus people on really doing things that are productive as opposed to things that just take time?
Yes and no. So if it's already pretty clear, it sounds like it's already pretty clear that there's a problem. Maybe it's not clear to everybody. It may be that inherently in that situation you've got a problem that is not easily resolvable. So if you look at that situation and whoever could help solve the problem is not putting effort into it, Agile can't help you. But one of the things that Scrum and Kanban can do, maybe Kanban to a greater extent, is to visualize problems. So if you see that your flow is all stuck and things aren't flowing through quickly, then it's pretty clear to everybody that there's a problem. And if basically there's one individual that you keep waiting for that has tasks that aren't getting done, it's pretty clear what's going on there, and it's going to be hard for that person to say, oh, it's not me. And then if it's still not getting resolved, there's there's no Agile principle that says thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that. What Agile is really best at is having the effect of, imagine you and your spouse are having a romantic evening at a restaurant, or your significant other, and the lights are low, and then somebody turns the lights on and you see something scuttling away, right? You might be thinking, oh, just please turn the lights back off. But at the end of the day, Agile, Scrum, Kanban are going to shine the bright lights on the environment, and the problems are there, whether you deal with them or not. It's up to you.
All right, terrific. Well, I think we should end here right on time. I will again repeat, we'll be sending everybody an email with a link to a recording of the presentation and the slides. We appreciate everybody being with us today, and look forward to seeing you at more activities in the future. So thank you again, Damon. Thank you again, Andy. And thank you, everybody else.